Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another Hard Talk, today to talk about airports. And of course, you've already seen it's going to be a fairly contentious topic, it would seem. And I'm delighted to welcome Olivier Jankovec, who is the Director General of ACI Europe, which is the Trade Association for Airports. Good morning, Olivier.
Good morning, Andrew.
So,
good morning,
Olivier,
everybody.
Let's start, if I may, just by asking some very simple questions about you. You're originally, it's a Croatian name, I think. Are you from Croatia?
My father's from Croatia, but I was born and raised in France.
In France, I see. And then you worked for... How did you get to the job you're in now?
Well, I'm a lawyer by training.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, I didn't like it.
Dear.
So I stayed a very short time with a law firm. I didn't like it, and I went to the commission, worked there for 6 years, 6 years and a half. Then went to Air France, then in Paris, then to Alitalia in Rome, and then finally I saw the light and came to the airports.
Hey. But, I mean, that's a very interesting background, isn't it? That you worked in an airline and now represent the airports. And we've seen from the video that there's clearly a certain amount of tension at the moment between airports and airlines. We had a discussion last week or 2 weeks ago with the A4E, and the issue of how much airlines have to pay for things like airport charges and so forth came up. It's a really very tense time at the moment. From the outside looking in, it's very clear that there is almost no possibility of reconciliation between you and the airlines. What's your view on charges? The airlines say our fares keep going down, your charges keep going up. What do you say to that?
Well, I think you need to take a wider perspective on this issue. I mean, we're bound to always argue between airlines and airports on charges. That's, it's part of the business, it's part of the normal life. But I think down the line, the issue that airlines still have a problem accepting is the business transformation that airports have gone through, and what implication does this have in terms of, what they need to pay for the infrastructure. Basically, if you look 20, 30 years ago, all airports were in public hands. Many of them were not corporatized. That means they were part of the administration. They received massive amounts of public funding to finance their development. And the states, as shareholders, owners of the airports, had no expectations in terms of a return in commercial terms on the airport investment. All they were asking the airports is, you take care of my national airlines, and that's it. And now, of course, we're in a different situation. I mean, we've had to go through a business transformation process where airports have become businesses in their own right because states don't want to pay for airport development anymore. They want airports to be self-financing. So instead of public financing, you have to go out on the financial markets, raise money, and that has a cost. And many airports have been privatized, and certainly the global financial crisis and the European sovereign debt crisis accelerated these trends. I mean, back in 2010, I think we're at about 22% or 21% of Europe's airports with private shareholders. We're now over 50%. And of course, private shareholders, well, contrary to governments, they want a return on their investment in financial terms. So clearly, you're moving to a system where airports as public-owned and run entities were used to subsidize airlines, basically, to a system when that's no longer the case. And in that process, there's more emphasis on the user pays principles. That mean, yes, for the users, the cost of using the airports has raised. But that's the logic consequence of that transformation, of those political choices made by governments to have airports as standalone businesses. And I think it's something that airlines have a problem accepting. And, when I was with the airlines, I had a problem accepting that.
Yeah, there are a number of issues that come out of that. One, I think, I'll come back to in a moment, is perhaps the parallel between the airports being corporatised and moved out from public hands, and then where the ANSPs go with that. But just before I ask you that question, isn't the problem, you've just said 50% of airports now are in in private hands, or in, no longer run by the state. But they're the profitable airports, aren't they?
Well, yes, I mean, mostly the larger airports.
No one wants to invest in an airport that's a money loser.
Presumably not, although, I mean, through private ownership, you can also turn the fortunes of airports, make them more efficient. And we're starting to see actually some I mean, initially it's true that the interest of private investors were focused on the larger airports, but in recent time we've seen private investment in smaller airports as well. But
But your figures are pretty clear, aren't they? If you don't have 1 million passengers, it's almost impossible, if not absolutely impossible, to make money at an airport.
It's difficult. I mean, we're in a business where size is critical because
Size matters.
when you have a runway, whether you have 700,000 passengers or 69 millions, the cost of operating and servicing and maintaining this runway is going to be the same.
So what are we going to do for the small airports?
Well, I think we already have an answer to that, in the sense that the Commission adopted back in 2014 new guidelines for state aid for airports, and although they pushed towards basically curbing public financing into airports, because the Commission considered that airports were competing and that therefore public financing, state aid, should not be allowed. They made an exception for the smaller airports, airports with less than 1 million passengers. So these airports can still get public financing in the form of state aid. Of course, it's very well framed and controlled. But there's an express recognition from the EU that indeed, for smaller airports, the economics, don't allow for them to operate profitably. I think at the moment, we have 71% of airports with less than 1 million passengers that are loss-making. Another alternative, of course, to public financing is to put these airports into a wider airport group, where you allow for cross subsidies from the larger airports to the smaller airports, and we still have those kind of setup in several EU countries.
Right. So back to that other question about where's the parallel? We had airlines originally, generally state-owned. They privatised in the 90s, in the noughties. The airports are now have pretty much gone through that process. Do you see it happening for ANSPs as well?
I'm not sure.
Why not?
Because of resistance to change, and if to go private, in the first place, it's a common choice. It's a public policy choice, so you have to have governments to decide that. And I'm not sure I'm seeing a lot of appetite for that from governments around Europe at the moment.
Well, yeah, I mean, given the heat that the airports manage to attract from the airlines, one would wonder how it might go. The other thing we saw in the video was there's a lot of stress now on capacity. I mean, EUROCONTROL's figures are very clear. By 2035, we'll need 8 new runways. Unfortunately, we'll need them in 21 cities, which I think is fantastic. Maybe we put it on a truck or something and just drive it around. But why are runways so hard to build?
Well, I think it's society that changes its attitude towards aviation that has changed to a large extent. There's, getting the license to grow has always been difficult in Europe, but increasingly it's actually not only about getting your license to grow, but sometimes getting your license to keep operating. I think the environmental pressure is very high, and I think that's the main reason, really. And we've seen over time governments being less supportive of that, and it goes in parallel with the fact that if you don't own and manage the airport yourself as a government and give it to somebody else, well, you're bound to be less supportive of the growth of the expansion of those airports. I mean, it's the direct link you have in terms of public interest is no longer there.
But the airlines bang the drum all the time about what a marvellous thing aviation is and how it's good for the economy and it's a multiplier and it bridges cultures and puts the cat out and helps children grow strong and tall and all that stuff. But so why aren't the airports in line with the airlines on that? Why is there so much tension, do you think?
No, on growth, sustainable growth, we're totally aligned with the airlines. I mean, we work together through ATAG on environmental issues and climate change. It's just that I think the airports is entrenched into a specific territory, and it cannot move. If you don't like the community around you, the political dynamics, you can't say, well, I'm going to move my airport and my runway somewhere else. And when you manage an airport, one of the first things you're confronted to is really the communities. Being a good neighbor, convincing people that you can grow sustainably, that you're a force of good, not just at the macroeconomic levels, because these are true figures. What we say with the airlines about, the global impact of aviation on the economy. But, for the people who live next to an airport, that bears very little meaning.
Yeah.
They want to know what's in it for them. And I think then the sustainability agenda is really the priority for us.
All politics is local politics.
Yeah. Well, and I think, it's interesting. You see a country like France, who historically was very forward-looking in terms of airport development. They built Orly, they built Charles de Gaulle. There was for quite some time a debate and a project to build a third Paris airport, even anticipating that Charles de Gaulle would become full, and that plans have been completely dropped. I mean, nobody's talking about it anymore, and you can't build a new airport in Nantes, and so we've seen really a shift in the attitude of governments towards airport development, and of course we have the Heathrow, the London airport capacity case, which is very emblematic of that.
Well, indeed. So Gatwick or Heathrow, which do you favour for the
Both.
new runway? Both. Two runways.
Of course.
But now that you've raised Gatwick, Gatwick moves 55 aircraft an hour up their runway. Heathrow, I think it's 100 on two runways. Why isn't every airport in Europe moving 55 aircraft an hour?
Well, I think no two airports are the same. So I think no two airports are the same.
The runway's the same.
But the runway is the same, but the context in which the runway operates is different, I think, in terms of the layout of the taxiways and how the ground facilities are built. Actually, Gatwick, I think, is actually a two-runway airport, which uses one.
We only have one.
So that gives quite some flexibility, especially for resilience and in case of problems. And then you have the ATM system, of course, which trumps it all. I often say that the airports it's a peculiar situation, I think, between airports and ANSPs, because as an airport, you basically, it's like developing, designing, financing, and developing an assembly line that you're going to operate. But the speed at which you can actually operate the assembly line is dictated by a third party, which is ATM and NSPs.
The ATM.
So it's...
But nevertheless, why Gatwick at 55, I realise they've got lots of high-speed runoffs and so forth. But then you get to somewhere like Lisbon, where they do something in the order of 24 movements an hour or something. Isn't there... my point, I guess, is, isn't there a huge amount of capacity in the system already that we're just not using?
Well, there's probably a significant amount of latent capacity that we need to work on to get it into the system and operate. But I think it comes down to really, I think, one of the core issues for us is how do you integrate airports more into the ATM system, and how do you work more collaboratively between airports and NSPs to make the most of the capacity we have.
So how do you integrate airports more into the ATM system?
Well,
what
I think,
a fine question.
It's to me. Of course, I'm not versed in all the technical details, but based on what I hear from our members, what we see coming from NSPs, from EUROCONTROL, I think it's primarily an issue with culture, a change of culture, and build a culture of cooperation. Again, I'm coming back to the peculiar situation we are in terms of our relationship with ANSPs, because although basically ATM dictates the throughput of the runway of the airport, there's no contractual relationship between airports and ANSPs in most part of Europe. Well, that's a valid question. I think I don't care whether there are contractual relationships or more. I think the important is that there's partnership, and that we reach out to each other and we can work jointly, and that's, I think we still have a lot of progress to make. An example for now, I still fail to understand why the FS doesn't participate in the EPOC of German airports. Surely this should make sense, and this should allow to achieve more efficiency. So I think there's a lot of resistance. I think it's also historic in the sense that this close relationship between airports and ANSPs existed in the past because we were both part of the state systems. We went our way, so to speak, evolving our businesses in our own right, privatization, what we've just mentioned. And in that process, I think